Cool. So I guess I'll kick off sort of the lifelong learning. I think we've heard about how important this is, and I think in general, like Coursera's mission is to kind of like unlock this lifelong learning so people can continue to develop their skills a lot like LinkedIn and maybe you've heard all about it. So quick introduction to myself. Hey, I'm Alan. I'm a data scientist at Coursera and I work on learning analytics. Essentially what that means is I work on the actual learning experience rather than getting people into courses is kind of the way we divvy it out. So most people here have heard of Coursera, yeah? Raise your hands? Yeah, okay, great. I'll go ahead and do a quick sort of introduction to what our learning experience looks like, because I think it'll help give some context for the talk. So on Coursera we have like 2,300 courses that almost all come from university content providers. And we have about like 1 million active learners every month, and they're all going through sort of flows like this. So this is kind of what like a typical like Coursera learner journey looks like. On the left here you can see our courses are broken into a number of weeks, and each week is then broken into sort of like modules, lessons, which essentially are just sequences of items here, as you can see on the right. So learners watch a lot of lecture videos, like 10 to 30 minutes. They do a lot of readings that are sort of mixed in with those. They might take a quiz at the end or do a programming assignment, maybe do a peer-reviewed sort of free text assignment. So as you can see, like there's a lot of stuff here, and there's a lot of steps, and you repeat that week after week. Like this course is 12 weeks long. There's a lot of pitfalls, and obviously completion rates in MOOCs are low, and there's a reason for that. And it's because learning is tough, and especially when we're trying to ask someone who already has typically a full-time job and has a life sort of outside of education to complete one of these things. It's not an easy thing for them to do. So an idea that we've had recently is, what if we had sort of a coach that could that was automated so that we could scale it to all of our courses, that could essentially just provide not interfere with the content that is produced by our university partners, but instead sort of enrich the learning experience and make it a little easier. So the agenda for the next 16 minutes or something. We'll first dive into sort of this problem for the need for in-context communication in online learning. I'll talk a little bit about sort of like the first prototype that we've used to test this out and why the flexibility of that prototype was important. And then I'll dive a little bit into use cases and results, but it's a very ongoing thing. So along this first point, so the need for in-context communication, I'll focus on sort of two main drivers for that. So this first one, many learners stumble on common pain points during the learner experience. So by this I mean we have thousands of learners that go through a lot of our courses, and the dropout isn't uniform. Here's sort of a look at like a dropout chart for one particular course. You can see, not surprisingly, it's a little steeper at the beginning, and then some survival bias comes in. Learners don't drop out as often, but you'll also notice it's certainly not uniform. And in this course in particular, one thing really stands out, oh wow, a lot of people drop out towards the end of the 5th week. And as it turns out, there's a difficult programming assignment, and it's the first really tough one in the course. So this is responsible for over 20% of all the total dropouts in the course. Half the people that reach this point don't actually get past it. But the problem is that we've seen this happens every single cohort of learners that go through our courses, but learners aren't necessarily aware of this, and it's something that we certainly know about the courses, but our learners really aren't that aware of it. And we've also seen in learner feedback that they'll highlight hey, week 2 is really tough. This particular part of the course was really difficult for me, and that's reflected in a non-uniform way. In addition, learners will point out hey, everything was fine, the concept seemed fine, but the programming assignments, this is really tough. So just because we see a big dropout at a point doesn't mean that's something that we want to take out of the course. Learning is tough, and a lot of times the most challenging parts of the course are actually where the most learning happens. But instead, we want learners to at least be aware that they're coming up to a challenging point, and we think there's some potential there because so many learners stumble at the same certain pitfalls, perhaps like some kind of automated message while you're going through the course can help sort of prepare you for some of these challenges. Another reason for that in-context communication makes sense is that motivation and planning are actually really sort of undervalued, like important challenges for people going through online learning. I'm going to go back to that same chart. So we saw like, oh yeah, there's a pitfall in module 5, and we can identify that, and that causes some amount of dropout. But the majority of dropouts are actually much more idiosyncratic. It's really hard to tie these to like, oh, this one thing, this one concept like tripped someone up and they never came back. That's usually not the case. Typically, it's just sort of the fact of the matter is that we have really long learner journeys, and some of them are really difficult. And they require a lot of planning and a lot of self-motivation. These aren't courses where, something's going to go on your transcript. It's very easy to sort of lose steam and lose motivation. So we see this dropout sort of throughout the course. So, what can we do about that? We see, again, in like some course reviews, our instructors will sort of provide like time estimates for how much the course might take, but they're really not fine-tuned like week by week. So a learner who's trying to plan out what they're going to do this week might come into shock when like in week 5 all of a sudden there's a really hard programming assignment that's going to take me 6 hours to complete when I've been spending like 2 or 3 hours each week. In addition, there's a typo in this review I'm just noticing, but learners also, although some of our courses have very active mentors and active instructors, that's not the case, and we have a long tail of courses where it is like more or less studying alone and you have to be really self-motivated. So again, this is an instance where we think having some kind of automated communication with the learner could really help. So I'm going to go ahead and dive into the sort of simple technology that we built to help deal with this problem. And I'll focus on both the flexible design and how it can be implemented in a lot of different places within the learner journey, and also a little bit on the infrastructure and what makes it so easy for us to iterate on, have a lot of sort of different stakeholders participate, which allows us to be creative and try out a lot of things quickly. So on this first point, the flexible design, I showed you all these screenshots earlier of all the different places in the learner journey that we might want to present a message to a learner or communicate with them in some way. And obviously we want a technology that's flexible enough that we can move it around to different places. So we came up with a front end that is sort of a message that sort of appears in the bottom right-hand corner of the learning experience. And this message is meant to be there as a sort of nudge, but not necessarily interrupt your learning experience. Not everyone is having problems with this programming assignment, but it's something that we want people to be aware of. So the idea is that this fits in many different contexts. For example, the message could pop up at the failing of a quiz, for example, but it's not something that's intrusive or really gets you out of your learner flow. If you're already in the flow, it's very easy to dismiss or ignore, but it also could be very informative and potentially help learners. So the second thing I want to talk about is actually, okay, what goes into building a new one of these messages? So they come down to sort of a pretty simple things that we need to specify. There's a message title, body text, obviously, maybe some subtext. And then we either have a call to action, which allows a learner to potentially go to another item in the course, or potentially launches a survey for us to collect some additional feedback or data from them. Or if we don't have that, then we just ask for a simple helpfulness rating, and this dismisses the modal or takes them somewhere else. And is pretty simple for us to specify. And the sort of process for creating a new message is actually very, very simple. So from our offline database, we can sort of specify messages. So maybe we want to identify which lectures learners revisit a lot, or which programming assignments are the toughest. So we can specify a location in a course, or at an item level, for example. Then we specify the message, which is essentially just the text we want to give them, and then a trigger point. So these triggers are user actions, and when a user sort of triggers the specific action at the location that we specified, then the message will appear. It goes through another level of sort of user level personalization that we can build in, and then once that message is delivered, we sort of complete the loop, by seeing, hey, like, did they rate it helpful? Did they click on the call to action? How did their subsequent behaviors on site change after that? So then we can continue to iterate, come up with new messages, and move quickly as we're figuring out what we want to build here. So the beauty of this is that it's really allowed for a lot of different stakeholders within the organization to participate in coming up with messages, because ideas are so easy and cheap to sort of pilot. We don't actually need to make any changes to production code to put out a new message. As long as that trigger has been used before, it's very easy for anyone in the company to be like, hey, I kind of want to try this message at a point like this. We can build it in, launch it in all of our courses that day, quickly get data on how successful it's being, and then be able to move forward and learn all of those lessons. So moving right along, I can talk about a couple of sort of the early use cases. This is still pretty early on, but I can show sort of how this learning process goes. So in terms of these coaching tips that are really around specific sort of course patterns that we've seen, that we can see on our dashboards and understand, hey, this is a big part, important part of the course for learners to focus on, for example, but they haven't really had visibility into those. So one example of those is hey, this is an important lecture. So we can identify important lectures because learners will return to watch them at a later point or watch them as they're completing an assessment. It essentially shows that, hey, this lecture probably teaches a concept that's important for the assessment. So highlighting that in a lecture is important allows learners to focus in at that point, maybe take a little more adequate notes so they don't have to come back. So this message, for example, got really high helpfulness ratings, and in some learner research, we heard sort of what we expected, that learners no longer had to figure out where to pay the most attention, and during these long learner journeys, they're able to understand, hey, this is really when I should buckle down and focus. So that's encouraging, and we wanted to try more messages that were sort of actionable and provided data like that. Another example is flagging difficult assignments. So I think we tried out a few different sort of thresholds, but essentially, if a certain amount of learners have to retake an assignment, we sort of deem it difficult, and then we can flag that to learners. So it's important to note that we actually didn't provide any real tips on how to pass this assignment. We've tried that on smaller scales, but something that's really scalable is we just say, hey, this is a difficult assignment. So a lot of learners found this helpful, and we even were able to get sort of a significant but small and localized lift to assignment completion just by telling them, hey, this one's going to be tough. So that's kind of cool, that just sort of warning someone that this is an assignment that's more difficult than past ones can actually help some learners to get past that assignment when maybe they wouldn't have otherwise. So the other kind of main motivation I talked about was motivation for learners in course, so they can keep going through these long learner journeys. So we tried some that were less sort of specific to actual locations in the course and were more sort of hey, keep motivation going. So we used some sort of growth mindset research to, hey, well, maybe when a learner fails an exam, we can give them an uplifting message. And we tried different iterations of these. But in general, sort of a lower proportion of learners found these helpful. And in user research, we found, hey, I really want something that's more actionable. I want it to be specific. So it wasn't quite as specific as these other coaching things, and it wasn't really tying back to any motivation, and wasn't really solving that problem we were looking at. But sort of because these messages were so easy for us to iterate on, we were actually trying a whole bunch of different ones, and we could try them quickly. So another member of my team wanted to see, hey, maybe it would be motivating if we could connect learners who are interested, who are on Coursera, to build skills to look for a new job. If we could sort of talk about connecting their learning to actually job opportunities. So one of the messages we tried in several of our data science courses, we just had a pop-up say, are you interested in job opportunities, sort of in the middle of their learning experience. If they clicked yes, we got a little more info about their current job and what they were looking for. And then we actually gave them an opportunity to apply for a data scientist role at Coursera, and sort of link them to our hacker rank test. So interestingly, even though we did sort of no personal targeting at all, 36% of learners actually signaled that they were indeed interested in hiring opportunities. And even more interestingly, we see this sort of index based on what we know about the reasons that learners are on Coursera. So when we do our onboarding, we learn a few things about learners, and one of the things we do is sort of categorize them based on like the reason that they're on the site. So like career advancers is our biggest group, and that's essentially I want to learn new skills to get better at my current job. But we also have a couple of groups that are more interested in starting new careers, career starters and career switchers. So these are people trying to learn new skills and get a new job. And then there's also people who are more interested in just the pure education of it. So if we use sort of career advancers as a baseline, we can see that our career starters and career switchers were actually like, in a relative sense, like 50-something% more likely to be interested in a hiring opportunity. And we now see this as an opportunity to really keep people who are interested in hiring motivated throughout the course and continue to showcase like job opportunities that they might be able to achieve. And then for some of these other groups, we could actually use more targeted motivation so that they can continue to stay self-motivated and feel empowered to move through these long, difficult learner journeys. So overall, just to highlight my main conclusions, like there are several big problems in online learning that we think could be helped by just being able to communicate simple things with learners in context being sort of the key point. Secondly, we built like a very flexible but simple prototype to be able to test out a lot of messages, and because we were able to be quickly iterative and creative, because it was so easy to sort of implement new messages, it allowed us to take a really open-minded approach. And because we moved quickly and were very quantitative in terms of assessing which messages were doing well, I think it's allowed for really quick sort of product evolutions and has led us in like some new directions for how we can continue to help learners. So that's it for me. Thanks.